Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this morning. My name is Ronnie Nolan. I'm Director of Kentucky Educational Collaborative for State Agency Children. We are hosting this in partnership with Hasan Davis this morning, and I'm so grateful that you all have joined us for what I know is going to be an exciting learning experience for all of us over the next 4 weeks. This is, as you can imagine, things have changed dramatically in the last 6 to 8 weeks, and we are branching out into a new service delivery this morning through hosting our first statewide PLC for educators who are in alternative education settings, similar to those that we work with, but also others across the state. We have folks from those, what I call traditional alternative schools, also joining us this morning, and we welcome them as well. Thank you for being here. We are excited about this opportunity. We have a great program lined up for you and a great speaker that's going to work with you over the next 4 weeks. I'm not going to take much time because I want to get directly into the learning that's going to happen, I know, today, and then again as we continue to meet. But we do have a special guest with us this morning, Hasan Davis, who is the former commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice. He is also the author of the book that we are reading together, Written Off. I think one of the important things that's happening in the book is that it's a story of overcoming extreme difficulties. I think it is a story about hope, and it is also, I think, a story about the importance of having caring adults and people who are advocating for children on the front lines, which I think is why it's so important that you are here with us today and learning how to use this important book in our work and to guide our work and to help us as we work with students across the state who need additional supports and who deserve the kind of supports that I know you all are providing for them on the front lines. Hasan is a graduate of the University of Kentucky Law School as well. And so if you're reading his story, you know that there has been lots of tumultuous times throughout his life, lots of advocacy and lots of overcoming some very long odds to get where he is today. And I think that this is a story that really resonates, not just with us, but also with the students that we serve. So we're really excited to have Hasan with us today. You'll notice over on the right side of your screen, you have a chat opportunity. Hasan has already invited us all to leave comments there, but I also want to encourage you to do that throughout our time together. We'll have lots of opportunities to talk and answer questions and to give feedback to each other and to Hasan. So without further ado, I don't want to drag on too long. I want to take this opportunity and thank Hasan for being here with us and also to welcome him. And I will turn it over to Hasan. Hasan, you're on. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ronnie. So glad to be here. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Everybody good?
Yes.
Great. I am Hasan Davis, as Ronnie said. And what Ronnie did mention is that we actually went to Berea College together. He's a little younger than me, but of course, you probably noticed by now I don't do anything traditionally. So it took me a few times so I think he was here my 3rd time back. And so we got to know each other. It's great to be here with you all. It's great to be reconnecting. First thing I want to do is thank you for the work that you do. Some of you, look at your names, I see your faces, and I recognize you, and I've worked with you. Some of you haven't had the chance yet, but I want to thank you for this important work. What you probably know, being in the trenches every day, is that this is the hard line between harm and hope. Your ability to help these young folks transition out of their most difficult, challenging moments into some possibility better. No guarantees. I think that's the piece we get stuck on sometimes. But the possibility that because you were there and stepped in and intervened, there may be a different outcome is really something we take for granted in so many ways. And so I want to take a moment to thank you for your presence and the courage to stay in this work with the most difficult. I know you all are like me in so many ways. When you tell people the population you work with, so many times they go, oh, geez, gosh, I'm so sorry. Walmart wasn't hiring, that kind of thing comes out, and they don't realize the kind of impact that we have. And it's hard work every day, but it is the most important work I think that can happen. So thank you all for being in it and being in here with me today and for the next 4 weeks. I'm very excited about it. I thought that this morning, what we're going to do is I'm going to talk some and probably I'm gonna try and fill in some gaps and take us through the first couple of chapters of the book. And then I'm gonna have you all break into smaller groups to have a little bit of group conversation with some guiding questions to see what your thoughts were, reflections, and how this might be connected to the work that you're doing and the commitment that you have. I think the easiest place for me to start is probably at the beginning. I had a couple questions in the chat that prompted pretty early about my learning disabilities. And so I'll talk a little bit about the early part, this experience that you've probably read so far in the book. Growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, with a mother that was very loving and a father that worked hard, one of the things that I learned early was that those two things didn't necessarily mean success. I write in the book, and I write in very broad terms because I still am processing a lot of it myself and with my family. But the night that my sister and I woke in the middle of the night to shouts and screams and jumped out of our bunk beds and ran into the living room to find my father throwing my mother against the walls was one of those moments that changed everything in my perception of what safety was. As he threw onto the couch and jumped on her chest, began to choke her, my older sister, Teresa, just 1 year older, made the decision that we had to do something. And when she ran to the kitchen, I followed behind and she drew that big knife out of the block and handed me the second biggest knife. That moment between us was a moment that we still talk about, where we had to decide at 6 and 7 years old exactly what we were willing to do to protect the one thing that loved us and we loved most in the world. And charging in there to try and disrupt this assault, what I realize now is that my father, who was tough by tough guy standards back in the day, he was that guy, wasn't afraid, but maybe he saw he become this baby's eyes. And I think that's what shook him to loosen that death grip on her neck. And as she dove for the phone, I remember thinking that this was a new world for me, that I never experienced anything like I had my first 6 years again. And watched my father be taken away in handcuffs. And as you all know, these are those indicators early on, the trauma, the drama, and the pain that start to show us young people who are starting to track toward the systems that we're in. When they start to experience these adverse childhood experiences early on, we began to move around from aunt to cousin to friend, began to spend more time sleeping on people's couches or on pallets on the floor, or 5 in a bed at grandma's house and mama was on the floor, wherever we could. But it was a process that gave us a chance to really solidify the family unit. And I think that was the thing that saved us. Even as we finally settled into a house and I started first grade, and that teacher began to look at me, and the question about my learning disability, it was one of those things that as a poor kid growing up in the inner city, you were either good to go or you were special ed, right? You were LDUH, learning disabled, right? The LDUH, that's what we used to get all the time. It used to drive me crazy. And so there wasn't even a conversation about differently able or learning challenges, even though IDEA had just been passed and we had all this legislation talking about every child. Every child was not really the commitment. And part of it wasn't just that systems weren't working, right? But we weren't preparing educators to do the work that we expected them to do. And I think that's what's so powerful about this gathering here and the work that KEXAC does, is that every year engaging and making sure that the folks that are on that front line actually have tools and skills to do the work that's expected of them. But in the first grade, that teacher, all she saw was the frustration of the kid who touched everything and couldn't stop asking questions that didn't have anything to do with what was going on. And he couldn't take lines and make letters, couldn't take letters and make words, he couldn't take words and make sense. And I think that frustration, and this is all me looking back, I just thought she was an evil person growing up. But now that I have a professional lens to look through, I realized that she wasn't supported in a way that made this a possibility either. And so her deciding to sacrifice me to the coat room in order to save all the kids that she could do something with, although I don't agree with it, I recognize it and see what she was trying to do. And in those moments, locked in that box, and in all of the boxes I was locked in since then, sitting in hallways and put in the special ed class, which was usually just a room with no windows and some sheets of paper to color on, I realized that I was going to have to find a way to keep pushing forward. And even though I wasn't being diagnosed officially at the time, my mother was constantly going through People magazine articles and anything she could find in our collection of, you all remember those collections of Britannica encyclopedias, like the 50 books? I mean, we moved 15 times throughout my childhood, and the only thing I remember as a constant is my mother figured out how to get those books everywhere we went until they burned in our apartment when when I was 11 years old or 12 years old. And so going through those books and trying to find a way to make sense in the world so that she could actually provide me support was the thing that she did to kind of keep me going. And that courage, I think, the thing that when I talk about hope dealers, individuals who, and hope isn't, so there's this conversation that happens a lot about hope, where people look at people like us and the word false hope comes up a lot. The fact that we're stepping in to hold this line for those kids that everybody knows isn't going to be whatever, fill in the blank. And the thing that I learned early from my mother is that hope was really a construct of possibility. And it's a convergence of three things. It's a want to have something better, the will to put into effect those things, and the way to make those things happen. And so a lot of it is building resilience skills and creating opportunity, but then convincing young people that no matter how many times they've fallen down, this next time might be the time, and having the courage to get back up. And I think it's that combination of all those and the pieces that we provide is really the way. That's the opening up doors and creating possibility. If you recognize anybody in the story so far, I would imagine you recognize Dr. Lorraine Wilson, because she is like so many of the hope dealers that I've encountered, running systems and working in education and child welfare and juvenile justice. Those folks who continue to invest in the possibility, again, not the guarantee, the possibility that because we were courageous, because we stepped in and engaged this child that everybody else washed their hands of, maybe tomorrow something different happens. At least they know when they start out that there's a possibility there, and they have to be the ones to really operationalize it. And so getting to this story for me opened a lot of doors that I'd closed. And having been Commissioner of Juvenile Justice for Kentucky and Vice Chair of the Federal Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice for the United States and Territories under President Bush, I realized that as the further I moved into my professional status with my law degree, the further I was away from the stories that had defined me. And so many people advised me as counselors that I should probably keep that part of my story to myself because, I survived it. Why keep bringing it up? It just makes people nervous and creates more questions, but you're professional. You've got all these accolades and all these, certificates. We should just lean on that. And I realized that without the beginning of the story, the end doesn't make much sense. Right? And so for me, choosing to go back and tell this story, to open up all those doors that I'd locked, bolted, and buried in cement, was traumatic in some ways, but cathartic, because it allowed me to systematically create a through line that other people could follow. So there's not this magical jump from, oh my God, to, oh my God, there really is a process, and there really are people like you all, those hope dealers, who were part of that process. And I want to be able to lay that out in a way so that people understood that this really was not unique to Hasan. This was not just that special guy, because it was a lot of special people around me that convinced me that in spite of all my flaws, I still had something to offer the world, and that if I was brave enough to get up one more time, then I have one more shot at being more than what I was yesterday. And so that is a tribute to you all the Dr. Rain Wilsons of the world. And she is, I call her Hope Dealer number 2, but 1 and 2 kind of sit up there together. My mom and Dr. Rain Wilson are the twin pillars that really allowed me to transition a world that nobody expected was possible. And so it was an amazing opportunity and gift to have them in my life like that. So what I would like to do this morning is, first, before we go into breakouts, and we're gonna go into breakouts, smaller groups, so you all can have some guiding questions. But in the chat, I would like you to just take a moment to write in one word, type in one word about how you're feeling right now. We got a lot going on in the world, so there's a wide range of possibilities there. I know how you're feeling right now, and type in one thing that you have done, one thing that has surprised you about the work you've been in since we've started this isolation. I just want to kind of get a sense of where everybody is, and then I'm going to ask you. We're going to break into chats. Katie is setting up chats and break you into smaller groups to have a little conversation about the first few chapters before we come back and process that. Does that work? We'll just take a couple minutes to let us know how you're doing and the kind of things you're working with through this experience. We can all rise. I like that. And as we're moving, I want to remind you all to also keep using the chat as a place to drop in questions. One of the things that I tell folks is I'm ADHD and dyslexic all day long. And so sometimes, and you all probably know what that is better than most when I say that. I know when I'm speaking at conferences, sometimes I'm having these feeling great about the conversation on stage, and I realize that people in the audience are going, wow, he really is got some special things going on. You know, I was speaking at this big conference in Pittsburgh, Allegheny Health Choices, their big mental health and behavioral health conference for the region, 700 providers and counselors. And I felt like a rock star up on stage, and, you know, people were nodding their head and taking notes in the front row. And as soon as I finished speaking, they rushed the stage like a concert, and people started handing me prescriptions and diagnoses and referrals. I was like, my God, the whole time they were like, oh goodness, he needs so much help. And I finally had to tell them, I said, look, you know, this is who I've been my whole life, you know, and for a long time, I thought there was something wrong with it, but I'm okay with it now. You know, I recognize that I go on tangents. I recognize that I've had to build my work world. And, you know, even the hard part of becoming Commissioner of Juvenile Justice, you know, trying to lead an agency with so many amazing people doing different things, I realized I had to build the system to support me in that, and it had to be different, but it was just different. And I think that's the thing that so many folks don't get about differently able and especially challenged young folks, is that there's a way for them to get there, but we just have to figure out how that happens. Dr. Rain Wilson is a great example of that in my own life. So I saw some great comments and some challenges, right? I mean, we are living in uncertain times, and it's easy to get frustrated, even with all the excitement for what we could be doing. There's so much that we don't have control over now. And I think for me, a big part of what has allowed me in just the last couple of weeks, I've been isolated for 7 weeks now. And if any of you who know me, you know, as a deeply extroverted person with learning challenges, external is the only way I operate. It's the only way that I can actually function in the world. It's the thing that gives me life and breath. And so being told that I have to stay home, and I love my family, but being told that I have to stay home and not engage has been one of the hardest things for me. And so this is actually one of the offshoots of that, you know, realizing that I needed to be doing my best work with amazing people the way I've done for the last 25 years. And if I have to adjust to do that so I can see 40 amazing faces on the screen, that's going to be the thing that gets me through. But so this has been getting to this moment right here where I can see all of you is really an amazing part of my growth through this challenge. And I appreciate you all being willing to be a part of my active therapy. And it will save me dollars in the end. What I would like us to do now is to go into breakout sessions. And Katie has been assigning you all to rooms. And what I'm going to ask you to do in the 15 minutes or so that you're there is to first introduce yourselves. We have worked to put you in small groups of folks that may have similar experiences of work so that the conversation isn't random, but more intentional. What I would like you to do in this time is identify from your own reading experience some of the characters or moments in the story so far that you really connect with. Maybe there's a challenge involved with the experience of little Hasan or the system that was trying to deal with little Hasan, or maybe there's an aha or an epiphany that came from that experience. And so using either one of those, a challenge or a generative idea, a thought that came from it, I'd like for you in your small groups to have some conversation about that. And then as we come back, it'll be about 15 minutes. And as we come back, I would like you each group to designate someone to share out, just to kind of get the broad strokes and thoughts of the conversation. How does that sound? Is everybody good with that? Outstanding. And so, Katie, are you ready to do the match? All right. And Katie's going to send you into your rooms and have a great conversation. And I look forward to seeing you all in a few minutes. Thanks so much for being here.
And you should be sent automatically into your breakout rooms. So let's hope it works.
The magic. Wow, it's like magical teleportation, like Hogwarts. Everybody again drawn back to the main room. Pretty cool.
Son, this is Jeremy Cameron from Owensboro Day Treatment.
Hey.
Keith Wells told me to tell you hello. He was just in here over my shoulder a minute ago, kind of listening to your thing, but he just I told you hello.
Well, I appreciate it. Good to hear from you all. Mm-hmm. Everybody doing good? So what I'd like, if you've all chosen somebody or somebody volunteered or was voluntold from each breakout, just take a couple minutes and share some of your conversation with the whole group. And I have no way of identifying who goes where. So maybe we'll just, if you're ready to jump in, jump in. I'd love to hear from you.
I'll go first and get it out of the way.
All right.
Our group, we talked about looking at our circumstances and where we came from and where our kids come from, and looking at the choices of we can be bitter about our circumstances or we can be better from our circumstances and use that to shape who we are.
Bitter or better? I love that, Courtney. Thank you. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Our group was Tammy Roberts and Peggy Shear, and one of the things that I hit on early was my own fear that I had reacted poorly. Basically, your second paragraph on page 24 talked about the parents and their fear, their embarrassment, and and then the way my internal walls might have gone up in response almost immediately, instead of seeing through, especially earlier in my career as administrator, instead of seeing through kind of the smoke and then trying to let that pass settle for a second and then connecting with them and saying, leading with positive, leading with, man, this is what I see. And then like what you're talking about being a hope dealer, kind of being a hope dealer to the parent in their hope for the future. It's like, I can see the same future as you, or maybe even helping them see a different future for their kid than they currently do. And I think that was, that really struck me and it struck us when we start talking about the baggage kids carry, especially our kids that are hopping from program to program to program, and the sheet gets longer and longer and longer. And Tammy talked about one of her practices is to make sure that she meets every enrollee first before she really looks at their paperwork, especially when it comes to behavioral history, and gives them the opportunity for them to describe themselves, describe their hopes, describe who they really are before she ever looks at the document, so that she can really give the kid a chance to kind of say, this is who I am for real, even though this is my history. You know? I thought that was really really powerful. And then kind of the other thing we just talked about is you know, how these experiences as a professional can you can go one way or the other. When you talked about Lorraine, that was kind of the next thing that hit me. When you talked about Lorraine speaking truth about her view of you, and you not seeing yourself there yet. It's like that constant speaking life into you helps you finally believe that about yourself.
Yeah.
And how important that is daily, especially when they come in with like just trauma flying all around, and figuring out how to kind of find that calming place so that you can actually speak and be heard about what you see and speak a different story into their life.
That's great. All great insights. Thank you.
Good morning.
You're muted, Judy.
Who's gonna go?
Yeah, I like that she meets the students first before she reads the paperwork. I know when I first started working in DJJ, you know, they passed around their, you know, information and their charges and that, and I just stopped reading them. You know, I don't need to know all that. I still have to teach these kids. And, you know, there are one or two people still in the building that read them first and then want to tell everybody about them. And I just say, you know, I don't want to hear that, because like she does, she gives them a chance to change the way that they're looked at and how they're defined in the building before she sees what they did in the past. I think that's a great idea.
That's right.
All right, I'll go. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. We just in my group we have Marcia, Catherine, and myself, and we discussed looking at our students, looking at who they can be, speaking light into their situation when they've had so many hurdles. Marcia discussed, you know, the importance of that positive relationship that she's had with a student who's had a lot of trouble in his life, and just his positive response and that developing that strong rapport with him. The part that spoke to me a lot was the relationship with Dr. Lorraine, her persistence in speaking life to your situation, Mr. Hasan, because that back then, I mean, that's, you know, that was not a typical response. And so, and then the persistence of your mother, Mr. Hasan, brought me back, it just, you know, brought me back to a place when, you know, when I didn't want to go to, like I went to a Catholic high school. I did not want to go to that Catholic high school. I was thinking about this morning before that we had our book discussion. But yet my mom's persistence paid off, because she was determined, and she knew that the high school that I went to was going to make me better. And so what I loved about your mom was that she knew that Horizons Academy was going to be the right place for you. Yeah. And that no matter what obstacles she was faced, she was determined you were going to go there, because she saw she just had a strong vision. And so that was the part that hit me the most.
Yeah, that's good insight. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jeff with Breakout Room number 1 with Kyle, Rhonda, and Heather, myself. And some of the important points that kind of struck us was just the perseverance that when doors were closed, when we were discussing your book, Hasan, that you never gave up. And we also discussed about like Bill Prinkett, the screen printer, the male role model. And something that struck us was like, you just were spending time. And I remember the one time you were going through in this truck and somebody had some garbage out on the curb or something, and you picked something up, and you just spending time and how he was resourceful and is just a male role model, and that kind of helped you. And we see that with our students, where especially where a lot of times there's not a male role model, especially with some of our male students. We see that and how important that is.
Good. Thanks, Chef.
This is Dara. I was in a room with DW, Kathy, and Donna. We kind of took your experience of being in a closet to discuss our own biases as educators. And, you know, when we have students, you know, are in our mind, are we putting kids in a closet, or, you know, what's our hope meter for kids when they come in, and, you know, trying to discover what their hope meter is as well, and trying to make things work. And the fact that we're all part of non-traditional settings, we feel like, you know, we were, you know, want to provide opportunities for kiddos who have had these not so great experiences in a traditional setting or in life, but be providing those opportunities to them and literally bringing them into a place, a brick and mortar type place, or if it's a virtual learning type place, that we literally, you know, take the hinges off the doors and say, hey, you might have put yourself in a closet, but, you know, we're not holding you back here. Let's see what we can do and give those opportunities.
Great. Thank you, Dara.
I can talk for our room. We were in room number 7. It was Brandon Barden, Sally, and Lachina in our group. And we actually talked a lot about dyslexia and how it affects students. 2 of us in the group have children who are dyslexic. And in Kentucky still, dyslexia is not a recognized disability. So students are often not getting what they need. They may be diagnosed having an IEP or something like that, but it's not labeled as dyslexia. Lachina said, the dyslexic mind is beautiful. I mean, you're creative. You just, typically they can think in more creative ways, but when they're given the task of reading something, it's a bigger challenge. About 30% of students who drop out of high school are actually dyslexic. And so that was a lot of what our group talked about.
Thanks, Shannon. It's good to see you.
That's Rick Collins. How are you doing?
Good.
I was in room 11 with Amanda, Nick, and Justin, and we discussed some of the challenges that we face and some that how they reflect on what you faced throughout your own childhood. You know, the being at Adair, of course, it's different, it's unique. A lot of times kids end up in a room by themselves, and it kind of brought back the thinking about, you know, you being in the closet syndrome. And then, you know, talking about the challenges. The big challenge I see is what happens to these kids once they've completed with us. It seems like a lot of times they become dropped. They're, you know, they have nothing, and we have to try to provide some type of hope for them in a way to follow up so that they got somebody that they can feel positive about. Even going back home, sometimes they don't have that that support system that's necessary to succeed. And that's one of the big things that I saw in reading your book, that, you know, at least you had a support system that helped you and encouraged you and was with you when a lot of these kids we deal with and work with seem like they don't have that system available to them.
Yeah, that's good insight, Ricky. Thanks.
So I was in breakout group 2, and we discussed just how your story is so very similar to many, many stories that we encounter with the students that we work with. And then we talked a little bit about perspective, just always trying to, see their perspective, see where they're coming from, because sometimes we don't always see things that way. And then we also talked a lot about like breaking the cycle or breaking that circle. Some of the kids are fine to go back to, life as it was, or that don't really have that hope. And so we talked as educators, that's hope is something really, really hard to teach. And how do we do that? How do we get them not necessarily to buy in, but after they have gone through trauma or gone through all these things in their life, then, to have that resilience and that perseverance and that persistence, how do we teach that so that they actually use it? And then we also talked about how education really for these kids is so important, but it's really the last thing on their mind. But their education is the one thing that might help them break the cycle that they're in, or do something different. But that's usually the last thing that they're concerned about, or the last thing they're able to concentrate on or see how that can help them.
That's great insight. Thanks, Dana. And I think that is all of the groups. Well, thank you all so much for the conversation, the feedback, the report outs. I know it's just a snippet of what your conversation was, but I appreciate getting some of that. Some of the themes and questions that came up, I think, are a great place for us to spend the last couple of minutes. This idea of hope is hard to get your head around sometimes. I think that my experience of it, of the folks who helped me really navigate it personally, was that I always say of my mother that she held God in her hands till I was strong enough to carry him myself. And I think in my head, that's what I see hope as: our ability to continue to see the possibility, but work in the present, right? So it's present and possible. Right now, this is where you are, and this is your challenge, and we have to deal with this right now. But I want to keep reminding you that there's another you possible. Those are the things, when I think about my mother, Alice Lovelace, and Dr. Lorraine Wilson, those are the two things that they held me in most often. Right here, I got to deal with the fact that you just lost your mind and did this really ridiculous thing again, Hasan. But don't forget, I also think that you are amazing, and I don't want you to let that go, because this thing right here is taking up so much space right now. And so the ability to craft a conversation, and a big part of it is relationship, right? It's about being able to engage them, and it's not that we have to be their homies or their friends. And I don't think that it wasn't until years after I graduated and came back and worked at Horizon School with Lorraine that I thought we were friends, right? But I always knew that she was my champion. I always knew, even the day she sat me down and said, Hasan, you have to leave, and you've been living here, eating 3 meals a day with me and being a part of my family, but you have to leave. Even in that conversation, which was one of the most painful conversations in my childhood about loss, I knew that as she looked at me, the thing that she was still saying was that, but you have, you found yourself here, and so let that be the thing. And so even push me out the door, she was showing me possibility. The thing that you'll notice is that I speak about my stepbrother, Sean, just as we finish this section, and my foster brother, Derek, my best friends, Derek and Sean. And you're gonna see in the next chapter, the next chapters, why that relationship is so important to me. But you're also going to see two very different ways that young people who experience a lifetime of trauma, drama, and pain respond to it. And I easily pin, you know, and I think I spoke about it already in this first section. Sean came to us with lots of the trauma and drama that we had, but he didn't have an Alice Lovelace as a grounding to kind of defer some of that pain and create some other space. And so that became a theme for us as we got older and we hit the streets and really became men, you know, trying to make a way in the system and you know, out of the system. For the two of us, the stark difference is pretty amazing. For the three of us, me being able to see, and several of you said it, you know, the words that I use very often when I talk about Dr. Rain Wilson and my mother is they were able to shine light into my dark places. They were able to create these little spots just so as the darker it got, the more clear those little spots came. And so there was this North Star. And when I think about Derek and Sean, the things that I think different for them is that they didn't have a chance to really build that kind of nurturing relationship with an adult. And so even though they know that my mother loved them like she loved all of us, and she made room for every child that needed it, even when we didn't have room, because she knew that there had to be a place for somebody to fall. One of the things that, I mean, you'll get to it, but I look back on it and literally Sean actually told me once, you know, I wish I could have believed Mama when she told me I was great, you know? And so I didn't realize she told all of us that because I thought I was that special. And once I got over being hurt that, you know, she actually did that, I realized that's what hope dealers do, right? Because we don't know it, and the definition of hope, right? Hope is a seed planted in rocky soil with no knowledge of how deep its roots will sink or how many its fruit will feed. But we still choose to plant and we still choose to wait because the possibilities are there. And that is the only thing we have. And if you have the ability to plant the seed everywhere you go, you don't know which one is going to catch on. It might be that one kid that nobody else gets to speak to and they can listen, but they can hear it from you. And it may be years later that it starts to grow, but our real job is to plant the seed and continue to nurture it with our actions to show that we really meant it when we said, you can be anything, right? My mama said, you know, if you could see what I see every time I look at you, you know how great you were. That made the least sense of any statement she could have made in the entire world. But it framed for me in my head possibilities that I never imagined. And it wasn't until years later that came back to hit me like a boomerang. I said, oh, this is that moment. I need to play, this is where I was. But it was all the things leading up to that made sure that when I was in crisis, I had more to draw out from my bank of karma than the pain of my experience. I had a few pieces of hope that gave me a choice and a different outcome. And literally, I think that is why I'm privileged to be here with you all now. So thank you so much for starting this adventure with us. I want to thank Katie and Ronnie over at KEXAC for creating the space for this kind of conversation for us all to kind of get filled up a little bit. And I'm excited about the next conversation next Tuesday. So I'm using this day to kind of figure out what day of the week it is because it's just been like, a day for the last 6 weeks. But now I have Tuesdays to look forward to. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation in the book. Getting into college was a surprise to me. I talked my way in, and then I had to do something. And the hardest part of it was finally finding the courage to let other people know that I wanted to be great and that I needed help being that, realizing that I could not. And so many students you're going to see in this part of the story are young people just like you serve every day who are afraid to let you know what they really need because where they come from, you let somebody know your weaknesses, they use it against you more often than not. And how we get past that so that we can actually give them what they need to become what they dream is going to be a big part of our conversation. We're going to leave the chat open for a little while after in case you have other questions. And if you do, please put them in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take questions and go through and process some of the comments and questions. And in my beginning of next week, what I'll do is I'll recap and probably answer some of those questions or address some of those thoughts. And I have some thoughts, a couple slides that I want to share with you all that I think might be useful. So as we head into our week and you get back to the important work that you do, holding this line between harm and hope, I want to thank you. I want to wish you safety, and I want you success and the amazing work you do. And one more time, I want to make it really clear how much I appreciate and adore the commitment you have made. You all are the reasons that I stepped into this work. People just like you, and wanting to be a part of the solution that helped me become the person that I am today. So thanks so much for that. Have a blessed week, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Ronnie?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Hasan. We appreciate you being here. We look forward to continued conversations, and we will see everybody next week at 10 a.m. or 9:45 a.m.
That's right.
You can log on 15 minutes early and leave your questions and comments that you have over the reading over the next week. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, everybody, for participating, for being with us. Katie will send out another invite for next week's meeting to make sure everybody has that. And then you'll just be able to click on that link and join us. But we're glad you're here, and we look forward to our shared work together. Again, thank you.
Ronnie,
We appreciate you being here.
Ronnie,
Yes.
I have one question. How far should we get in our reading for next week?
Oh, thank you so much, Angie. Hey, I've tabbed it. I've been working on this. I think that if you go from chapter 5, which is page 55, to page 94, which is the end of chapter 10. So chapters 5 through 10, okay? Thank you for that, Angie. See you all next week.